Okay, hello everybody. Thanks again for joining us for day 3 or episode 3 of Let's Talk About Shh. Today we are going to be focusing on talking about hookup culture. Um, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, Let's Talk About Shh is all about, or is a live podcast all about talking about love, intimacy, and relationships. You can call them with your questions, call them with your comments, call them with your stories. If you have any thoughts about, the topics that we're talking about today. So, without much further ado, let's go into it. So, first of all, who am I? My name is Tila. I'm a sex educator and relationship expert, and also published author. That's me with Omarosa there. She got a copy of my book, Got Consent. Super lovely. So I started doing this because I wanted to promote a little bit more in terms of like sex education. I think it's a super important topic, and I think everybody needs to learn a little bit more. So my goal with this podcast is to not only help people with any questions or, advice that they might need about their relationships and intimacy, but also to help, people get a deeper understanding of sex and sexuality. So, I love it when people comment. Commenting is awesome. This is a live broadcast. The comments will appear in the live broadcast video as well. But if people are calling in or commenting, please remember to, we're trying to build a positive community here. There's lots of negativity out there in the world right now, particularly with the COVID pandemic. So, we want to try and keep this a positive space. And there's no such thing as a stupid question. As a sex educator, I get all kinds of questions. People's knowledge base is really all over the map. Some people know a lot. Some people know next to nothing. And, we all want people to be able to understand that part of themselves, right? So there's no such thing as a stupid question. So if you're commenting, whether it's in response to somebody calling in or a response to someone else's comments, please remember that, try and keep your comments on a positive note and use the THINK acronym. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? Because we want everybody to have a super good experience here. So, moving on. Hello, Amanda. Thanks for joining us. So, I'm going to open up the phone lines now, so if you have any questions or comments or thoughts or stories you want to share, please feel free to call in. The number, of course, is toll-free at 1-877-777-5589. And as I mentioned at the start of this, today we're going to be chatting a little bit about hookup culture. So originally I was just sort of going to go into how hookup culture has changed or will change, or what sort of things we might think about with the COVID pandemic. But I was actually chatting with somebody yesterday, and they said to me that they weren't really familiar with the terminology of hookup culture. And so I thought maybe it might be a good place to start to define what hookup culture is, and maybe some of the things. There's been a lot of research that's gone into talking to people about hookups and casual sex, and that's basically what we're talking about when we're talking about hookup culture. So hookup culture is sort of loosely defined as people who are seeking casual sex without a lot of emotional intimacy or attachment. These can be one-night stands or short-term casual relationships where there's no expectation of commitment or fidelity. A lot of the times it is a single one-time occurrence. We've seen a number of films over even the last, 10 years or so that have focused on plot lines where, either friends or casual encounters engage on some sort of relationship where it is a casual hookup kind of relationship. Most of these are comedies, hijinks ensue, it has... there's also been some TV shows too, now that I'm thinking about it. Anyway, but all of this has sort of put the idea of casual sex a lot more into people's heads. And there's nothing wrong with casual sex. It can be great. It's really about who you are and what you value, and whether or not casual sex is a good fit for you. So Yeah. Thank you for commenting, Amanda. I realize that this can be a difficult topic for some people. Hopefully we can talk about some stuff that gets through it. Once again, if you want to call in and chat about it, you're welcome to call in and we can chat about it if you want. No pressure, of course. So looking at hookup culture, how many people engage in this? Is it super normal? The media would have it believe it's actually pretty common. Turns out it's fairly common for younger generations. Somewhere between 60 to 80% of people have chosen to engage in casual sex or a hookup. A lot of younger generations have started to see this as a kind of a rite of passage. A lot of people in the younger generations have reported that this is how their relationships, or many of their relationships, have actually started, because there's sort of a prevailing opinion that it can sometimes be a lot easier than other forms of dating, because it starts out more casual. It can be a lot easier to get drunk and make out with someone, or get drunk and engage in more sexual acts, whether it's simply making out or other activities, or going up to full oral sex or penetrative sex. And some people, like I said, feel that this is a lot easier than asking somebody out on a date, or asking somebody to go out for coffee or something. That can feel like a lot more pressure for some people. There's also, with some of the changes in the last trying to think about when the first dating apps really started. I don't know. I don't remember. But, at least for the last, I'd say 10 years, I guess, there's also a lot of apps that have emerged in terms of dating. A lot of the younger generations will be familiar with this. For anybody who's not, there's lots of different apps you can get for your phone. A few that come to mind are Tinder, Grindr, OkCupid. I'm sure there's 10,000 more. And it can be, a lot of them go with a swipe left, swipe right, and you do so based on a profile picture. And a lot of people use these apps for random hookups. In fact, most people that I've spoken to, and most research suggests that it's actually quite difficult to find a relationship on a online app. Ironic, because that is actually how I met my partner, was through an online app. But so anyway, so hookup culture can happen in a lot of different ways, whether it's in person, at parties, at college campuses, at whatever group party, or through the online dating world. There's a lot of different reactions to whether or not hookup culture is a good or a bad thing. As with anything else, I would say it's not one or the other. It's not all good, it's not all bad. And if you look at the research, there's a lot of mixed reactions. Initially, most people report a hookup or casual sex as pretty positive. I think it's something like up to 80% of people say that they're happy about it, they feel good about it happening, and they're glad they did it. It is natural for some people to feel some regret or disappointment as well. And it also depends how long somebody has been engaging in casual hookups. There's sort of, if you read between the lines in the research and you sort of look at what people report, the majority of people, the longer that they're engaging in casual hookup culture, the less good they feel about it. So usually people start off feeling really great, and that it's a good positive thing. But as time goes on, and they can keep on engaging in all these casual encounters, whether it's with one person or with multiple people, it can actually impact their feelings of self-worth or their feelings of isolation, strangely enough. This can happen for a lot of different reasons. One being that sometimes people can become obsessed with their performance. So it no longer becomes a matter of, was this fun? Did I have fun? Did my casual partner have fun? People become very anxious about what will be said about them, about their performance from that casual partner. So this is a little bit more prominent in, for example, colleges and universities, on campus, where people are prone to talk about casual hookups a lot. Sorry, I just need a little water there. Um, so yeah, so people become very concerned about their performance, and it that can actually impact whether or not they actually have a good time, and actually interfere with it. And depending on a person's anxiety, that anxiety can continue to climb. Now, there is some differences between different genders for how they respond to casual encounters, and a lot of that is because of sociology. You know, we are all socialized different based on our gender. Unfortunately, a lot of the research looks at heterosexual couples. I didn't come across a lot of research at this point for LGBTQ couples. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to say here is probably a little bit more relevant to heterosexual couples or people who identify as heterosexual. But for young men, there's a lot of pressure for men to be always prowling for hookups. You know, a lot of the reputation is staked on, you know, how many people they've slept with, and if it's a low number, then they're considered inexperienced, and that's bad. You know, that's bad in the eyes of their peers, and they also perceive that their prospective female partners will also see it as bad. So a lot of young men say that they feel quite embarrassed if they don't have as much experience as a partner. A lot of young men have also reported that instead of being focused on the pleasure that they get, they actually, like, the hookup becomes the goal itself. And so it's not so much about pleasure, but about conquest. And that factors into the whole thing about, you know, in the eyes of their peers, are they a ladies' man, you know? And those sort of feelings persist despite, well, I guess despite a growing number of people thinking that that's sort of an outdated idea. Enough people still feel that way that it still persists. The thing that's also fairly challenging for men as well as when it comes to hookup cultures is that, you know, men are really hamstrung in a lot of different ways in terms of emotional intimacy. There's a lot of people who feel that men can't form or shouldn't form emotional attachments to other men, that they shouldn't form emotional attachments to women that they are not sleeping with. So that really limits the type of emotional connections that men can make. And a lot of young men who have been engaging in a lot of casual sex over a period of time have reported that they continue to feel a higher sense of disconnect. And I think this really stems from the fact that in so many ways society tells them that it's not appropriate for them to create those emotional, intimate connections with people. So, you know, if you look at it, mainstream cisgender heterosexual men, their main source of emotional intimacy is either from a mother figure, which they also have to separate from to a certain degree by a certain age, otherwise they're viewed as like a mama's boy, which of course has all sorts of negative connotations. So their main source of emotional intimacy is a romantic partner. Well, if they don't have a romantic partner, if they don't have a steady romantic partner and they're continuing to engage in lots of casual sex, they're not getting that need for emotional intimacy met, right? So they start to feel really disconnected from other people and really isolated. And this can actually impact, this can impact their self-esteem. It can impact their sense of enjoyment out of life. And it also, in a lot of ways, ends up impacting their views of women. They start viewing women a little bit more negatively because not only have they made, sex like the conquest, it's more important that they manage the hookup than who they're hooking up with, and that they feel connected to that person and want to be with that person, than it is that they did it and then there's no connection. So then, they're feeling this sort of rejection of emotional intimacy. And that can be really difficult for a lot of young men. And it's also challenging too, because it can actually, over the long term, if they don't have that practice, of emotional intimacy and connection, when they actually are prepared to move into a more serious or committed romantic relationship, they may not have developed the communication or intimacy skills in order to form mature romantic attachments. So it's sort of like if you're looking at like the long-term impacts of hookup culture for men, those are some things that, should be thought about and can potentially impact them. For women, it's a little bit different. I mean, women tend to feel a lot more guilt and may feel more regret over hookups over time. There's a lot of pressure for women to abstain from casual sex. This comes from a lot of a lot of outdated notions about sexuality, many of them tied to religion, many of them tied to the belief that, virginity in women is prized. So, we have lots of colorful and unfortunate names for women who enjoy casual sex and promiscuity. And so as time goes on, when women continuing to engage in lots of casual sex, particularly with lots of casual partners, they tend to feel a little bit more regret. They start to feel guilt, and it can actually impact their self-esteem as well, because they start to feel a little bit more like a disposable object, even though it is their choice to engage in those behaviors. It just sort of becomes, people will talk about it as getting a reputation, and that reputation can be sometimes uncomfortable and unfortunate and kind of judgmental. And as much as we say that we don't care about what other people think, to a certain degree, what other people think about us does, for most people, have an impact on how we view ourselves. So there's also the thing too, is that women who continue to engage in casual sex often will, they don't always experience the same pleasure that men get. Men overall report that if they don't care about the girl that they're with, they've reported that they don't really care as much if she experiences pleasure or orgasms. Sometimes they don't even know. Women also report that the longer they're engaged in casual sex, the less pleasure they find in it. That can be for all kinds of reasons, whether that's, pleasure in sex is kind of a whole other different topic, one that we should probably dedicate its whole hour to, and I think we will in the future. But there's lots of different reasons why sexual pleasure could decrease over time, right? Anyway, so those are some of the things to think about, like long term for casual sex. The other thing I wanted to sort of talk about in terms of casual sex is that overall, people tend to report lower levels of communication. So communication in a relationship is always challenging. I mean, society has all these different sort of, in many cases, they're sort of unspoken rules, like how long do we wait before we talk to someone that we're interested in again? After you see them or after you talk to them, how long do you have to wait again before the next communication? This has been joked about in TV and media. People joke about it. People express frustration about it. And, there's all these weird little rules that we have for it so that we don't seem overbearing or needy or too much. And the funny thing is about casual sex is that there's this expectation, because there's less emotional intimacy, that there should be less communication. If anything, too, like with casual sex, there seems to be more communication prior to the sexual activity, and then after the sexual activity has occurred, typically there's like little to none. In fact, a lot of people say that they actually agonize over texts after like a casual night with someone, because one, they don't know how long they should wait before they send the text, and then two, it's always agonizing because somebody could send a text like, "Hey, had a great time last night," and that could mean so many things. That could be like, "Oh, thanks for the great night," like, swoop, like super, or that could be, hey, had a really great time, want to do it again. Like there's a lot of ways that could be taken, and particularly when it's over text, there's like no way to know. There's no tone, there's no context. People have no idea, and they're afraid to ask. Because they feel awkward about asking, because there's this whole awkwardness about communication. And, some people are afraid too that if they went into it knowing it was sort of a casual thing, they're afraid to, even if they are interested, they're afraid to express that interest because, if they are seen as expressing interest first, it's almost like losing. In some people have described it like, oh, I lost because I showed too much interest first, which is kind of a weird concept, really, because some people have actually said that even if they are interested in someone after a casual encounter and want to have a relationship, they would rather pass on the opportunity than say something first. So it's like, okay, so, you're passing on this good thing because you don't want to talk. So that can be a bit of a challenge, and the whole thing with communication is so important in regular relationships, and it's important in casual relationships too. And I know some people will be like, oh my God, she said casual relationships. That's the whole, not the point, is no relationship. And I just want to say that any time you have an interaction with someone, you have a relationship with that person. I mean, relationship doesn't automatically mean, commitment. So just pointing that out. Anyway, but yeah, there's this whole reluctance to show any interest in emotional intimacy or commitment. And I think a lot of this kind of ties back to that whole idea of reputation and status or loss of status. This is, I think, seen a little bit more with particular scenes of people or places like college campuses or something like that, where people are sort of familiar with each other, but there's a lot of random hooking up. People have this perception that they have this reputation in these circles, and if that reputation is destroyed, then, they might not have any friends, or they're worried about how people react to them. So we sort of talked a little bit about what sort of things we should be looking at when we're talking about casual sex. Sorry, my cat always loves to jump up when I'm doing things, particularly when I'm talking. She hears my voice and she's like, oh my God, I have to go see whatever she's doing. Anyway, so, hey, sorry, cat related technical difficulties. Anyway, so talking about hookups, there's a lot of things you should think about if you're trying to decide if this is right for you. And before I sort of go into sort of questions you want to ask about yourself, there's something else I would kind of want to cover, and that sort of falls into the area of risk. So there's lots of different potential risks when you're looking at casual sex, and I don't think a lot of people think much about them. I know that most heterosexual couples, the first thing that comes to mind is an unwanted pregnancy, which is definitely something to be considered. What would you do? What would happen if that were to happen? The one that's less talked about is really sexually transmitted infections, or STIs. And I think that's an important thing to consider, because you definitely want to be aware of the risks. That kind of goes back into that whole consent thing that we were talking about yesterday. You want to know what kind of level of risk you're facing, and what sort of risk you're comfortable with. Particularly in the US, and Canada is not much better. There is a lot of sexually transmitted infections flying around. And BC, where I live, syphilis has actually been on the rise for the last, I think, 5 years. We've seen higher numbers of syphilis than we ever have. Just for the record, syphilis used to be a sexually transmitted infection that we thought was dead for a while. We thought it was completely gone. And then we're getting new cases. Syphilis can kill you. I know that's not fun to talk about, but it's a reality. So, and then the highest transmitted, sexually transmitted infection is actually chlamydia, followed closely by gonorrhea. And I mean, both of those are curable by antibiotics, but they also have some potentially severe life-altering consequences if they're left untreated. And gonorrhea, if left untreated, will kill you. Chlamydia, if left untreated, can cause other infections that can result in death as well. So it's important to think about those things, not to be like, this is not like a scare tactic, never have sex thing. It's just be aware of the risks, know what the signs are, know what precautions you want to take, know what level of risk you're personally comfortable with. As far as casual encounters go, I always recommend condoms. It is not worth it otherwise. Unless, I mean, even if you know the person, if they're engaging in lots of casual sex, who knows how often they're being tested, who knows how many people they're sleeping with. So if engaging in casual sex, always recommend a condom. And if the partner's not willing to use a condom, then maybe this is not the partner for you. Once again, that's a personal choice, but I do, as an educator, I do have to highly recommend safer sex methods. It's just not worth it. The other thing you have to be aware of as far as casual encounters go is, the consent piece. With that sort of reduced amount of communication that we were sort of talking about before, a lot of people also don't really communicate about consent either and what the limitations are. So, sometimes, like, maybe somebody is not necessarily looking to hook up. Maybe they just want to flirt. Maybe they just want to make out. Maybe they just want to engage in one type of sex. But the thing is that a lot of the times people are not communicating that. So, in terms of casual encounters, you can't take anything for granted. You really need to make sure you hit that communication piece hard. And if somebody isn't really willing to communicate with you, we sort of talked about that yesterday and what you can do. So I won't repeat that now, but it's definitely something that you want to think about. Now, originally, my idea for talking about this was talking about how hookup culture is or potentially could change thanks to the pandemic of COVID. And I definitely think that there are going to be some things that should change and could change. And, that's definitely like a bigger risk right now than anything that we've faced. Now, I know some people have been talking about like, oh, well, hookup culture, that's essentially dead. That's dead now. Thanks to COVID, that's dead. And it's, in some ways, that's true. I would not necessarily recommend that hookup culture as we have known it, where you're seeing lots of casual partners whenever, is a good idea. The risks of the pandemic are just a little bit too high right now. I know things are starting to open up again, and we've relaxed some rules in many places, not everywhere, of course. But that doesn't mean that you should run out to the races and business completely as usual, and you shouldn't worry about COVID anymore. I highly recommend that anybody who is feeling they need to hook up, I think at this point, sort of the best idea, and I know this was actually also recommended by several doctors, is that, it is important for our mental health that we find connection and everything like that. So if you are looking at hooking up, maybe instead of lots of casual partners, maybe look at having a temporary hookup with someone where maybe it lasts for more than one time during this time. Because, if you want to go out and do that, that's great. but think about the level of risk that you're exposing yourself to and that you're exposing other people to by doing that as well. So it might, like I said, it might be a good idea to just have an agreement with someone that during this time, maybe you guys will just see each other briefly. It doesn't necessarily have to mean anything. There doesn't have to be that emotional connection if you don't want there to be. Um, but it's something to definitely think about. And I think that with everything happening with the pandemic, I think it will change overall the way that people look at hookup culture. I think people are going to be more reluctant to engage in casual encounters the way that they were before. I think there's definitely going to be some people that are going to be more motivated for casual encounters than they ever were before. But there's also going to be a lot of people who are reluctant because of the risks. And I think there's always going to be, to a certain extent, there's always going to be a hookup culture that will never change. There's always going to be people who are looking for casual sex. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we all look for sex for different reasons. We all look for it to fill different needs at different times. And, that's okay. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But how COVID, I think, will affect how people approach it. And I think people will be not quite as quick to hook up, at least right now, and at least for the foreseeable future. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts about that, or if anybody on the call is actually still engaging with hookup culture, or looking for those hookups and what their experiences is. I would love to have you call in and share that, or share it in the chat for the benefit of everybody if you have any stories. But I know that right now there's not as many people engaging in that kind of behavior. I also think that with things with the pandemic, I think that there's going to be more conversation prior to now. I mean, there was always more conversation before hookup, but I just mean there's going to be a lot more. People are going to spend a little bit more time thinking about those risks and what level of risk they're comfortable with. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's going to slow things down in terms of, especially with things like the dating apps, I think, are definitely going to slow down. And how people approach casual dating is definitely going to be different, because I think you're going to spend more time talking to someone, because now it's no longer, with that higher level of risk with the pandemic, you want to know, is this person really worth it? Am I really willing to risk myself for exposure to this person? And, there's going to be a little bit more of a slowdown in terms of people actually might end up going out on more coffee dates and things like that, because it'll be easier to do a social distance date than it is going to be to do a completely fear-free casual hookup. So I think that's how things are probably going to change for the moment. I don't know, like I said, if anybody has any thoughts on that, feel free to type in the chat or call in by all means, and give your comments or thoughts or stories. I know I've spoken to a few people who are still sort of doing the dating apps and everything, and it definitely, people have been more reluctant to meet others, and more people are making social distance coffee dates and stuff, and lots of people have canceled. So I think there's going to be a fair bit of that. I know that in hookup culture, people talk about quite a lot about people being kind of flaky, where they make plans and then don't show, or they cancel at the last minute. I definitely think that's going to happen more often right now, and that's something you should prepare yourself for if you're in the casual dating scene. Be prepared to be canceled on or stood up a little bit more often. And I think that, don't take it to heart. I think it's just a sign of the times at the moment. And maybe to reduce that, if you're using things like dating apps and stuff like that, I would actually spend a little bit more time talking in the dating apps before setting a time to meet. Because I think if you invest a little bit more time talking to someone, and they seem more interested in meeting you, I think they're less likely to cancel last minute or have second thoughts about the level of risk or whatever last minute. So you'll probably get a lot more follow through, would be my guess. So we've talked a lot about hookups and why people do it and the risks and everything. And it's important to note that, this is not, is it right for everybody? The answer is no. It's not right for everybody. And that's okay. It doesn't have to be for everybody. Everyone, like I said before, everybody has their own motivation and desires for sex. Everybody's at different places in their lives. So if that's not for you, that's okay. That may not be how you're built. That may not be where you are in your life. Or it may be, I don't think that this is a black or white situation. When we first started talking about it, I mentioned how, hookup culture is not inherently great or inherently awful. It really depends on where you are in your life and how you're feeling about things and how you're feeling about, who you are, what kind of relationships you want to have, all that kind of stuff. And so whether or not this sort of culture is right for you is a super, super personal decision. And realistically, it's only one that you can make, like you're the only one who can answer if it's right for you. If you're still looking, if you're saying, yes, I do, this is what I want to be doing. This is where I'm at. I don't think I can handle a commitment. I don't think I want to go down that road right now. That's okay. That's great. You do you, right? As long as you're honest and open with yourself and prospective partners. I think there's just certain things that you should be asking yourself, particularly in light of COVID. So once again, sort of talking or asking yourself, what kind of risks are you okay with? What level of risk are you willing to go to for a partner, and is there a qualifier on that? Is it somebody you really like? What characteristics do they have? What makes it worth it for you? And what sort of things are deal breakers, or what sort of things are going to give you second thoughts? And it's a good idea to know that sort of stuff ahead of time, so that you can be clear and open not only with yourself but with prospective partners, because they have the right to make decisions just the same as you. So you got to be you got to be good with that communication piece. I've said it before many, many times in many ways, but communication is really the keys to great sex. And that's true whether it's casual sex or a sex in a committed relationship or, poly relationship or whatever kind of relationship you're having. Communication is really key. And it's going to be the way that you build better experiences for yourself. If you want to do the whole casual sex thing, bite the bullet and just be open in your communication. There's certain things you should think about asking a potential partner as well. The kinds of questions that you should be asking really depend on the level of risk you're concerned about. And they can be a little bit more, I think at this time, as awkward as some people may feel this is, you might want to consider asking a potential hookup, what their level of risk is, or what sort of precautions they're taking with COVID. Do they have any concern that they might have been exposed, anything like that? I think during this time with the pandemic, I think a lot of people will be fairly forthright about it. I think a lot of people will be understanding as well. And if they're not, and they're getting their back up about it, then maybe it's not the right person for a casual hookup. Use your best judgment, and just be aware that whatever choice you make, you need to be okay with it. At the end of the day, it's your health. It's your life. With COVID, if there's someone that you have in your life that you're concerned about exposing, make choices that are going to make you happy. There's no point in going through unnecessary risk, and there's no point in making yourself miserable by making bad choices, when a little thought and a little care can take you a long way. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or questions, if you want to pop them in the chat or give a call in, or if anybody has any stories they want to share about anything I've said or anything regarding hookup culture. You guys are all pretty quiet today. I know it can be hard to talk about personal experiences, but it's how we all learn, right? So, all right, nothing coming through. Well, that's pretty much all I had to say about hookup culture today. I ended a little bit earlier than I expected I would. But if there isn't anybody giving a call in or anybody who has any thoughts that they would like to share about hookup culture and COVID, doesn't appear so. That's all right. One thing I do want to mention is there's sort of an idea in regarding casual sex. There's kind of an idea that a lot of people engage in a lot of casual sex because they actually lack self-esteem, and it's a way to boost their self-esteem. I would argue that that is incorrect. I think that for the vast majority of people, it doesn't really have much to do with self-esteem. I don't think people hook up necessarily because of self-esteem. People engage in casual sex for lots and lots and lots of different reasons. And I think that saying that people are only hooking up to boost their self-esteem, I think that's honestly just a way that people try to shame others. You know, like, oh, well, that person only puts out because, you know, that's the way they think. That's the way the only way they think people will like them. In most cases, I have not found that to be true. I have not come across a lot of research that supports that point. I mean, I think people consent to stuff all the time for different reasons. People have sex all the time for different reasons. I think, if anything, the closest that we might come to someone who is engaging in casual sex, if anything, they might be doing it to safeguard a relationship where they feel that they can preserve the relationship better if they consent to the sex. But that doesn't necessarily mean it has anything to do with self-esteem. Women in particular have been socialized to be caretakers of others. And we see most of the comments regarding like someone having low self-esteem and sleeping around linked to women. And I think, like I said, I don't think it has anything to do with self-esteem. I think it has to do with how women are socialized. And women are being socialized to be caretakers, to do things for others, to preserve relationships. And like I said, it's a lot of women will consent to sex on the strength of that, if they think that it is going to preserve or salvage or repair a relationship with somebody that they care about, particularly somebody that they might have those kinds of feelings for. So that is a big piece. The choice to engage in casual sex, regardless of gender. I mean, sure, it can impact self-esteem because in some ways, if you're able to hook up with lots of people, in some ways that can feel good, right? Because lots of people want you, and that can boost your self-esteem. However, it is not, I don't think it's a common way that people look to go boost their self-esteem. Most people do not think, well, if I sleep with lots of people, it means people want me, and therefore that must make me a great person. People don't really think like that typically. I'm not going to say no one thinks like that, because there's lots of people who think lots of interesting and unique ways, but on average, people don't usually think that way. The other thing to note is, like I said earlier, is that um, in many ways, engaging in continuous and constant casual sex can actually, for some people, negatively impact their self-esteem because they feel that they have nothing else to offer or to worth. So I don't think the decision at all to engage in casual sex has anything to do with self-esteem. So I just wanted to sort of point that out. I know it's probably not the most popular opinion, but it is something that I firmly believe. I think they're correlated. They're not. It's not a causal link. All right. Well, that's not the full hour, but that's all the stuff I wanted to say about casual sex, at least at this time. So unless anybody wants to call in with a story or share some tips that they have or some experiences they've had in, or maybe an experience that a friend has had regarding using dating apps or hookups during this time, I invite you to give us a call and share the story, because your stories can help other people too. But the phone is not ringing yet, so I think we will call it for today. Tomorrow, we are going to be back for another episode, starting at 8 p.m., of course, Pacific time, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'd love it if you guys can check in with us tomorrow. Tomorrow, I was thinking we could talk about an introduction to BDSM and go over some of the basics and things that you should think about and things you should know and consider before or getting into BDSM. I have lots of stuff on my website, so please feel free to check it out. There's lots of resources on a variety of different topics. If you're looking for a little bit extra more, I have our Sexy Hero Society, which is a paid membership portal. It's $20 a month and gives you access to lots of extra and awesome content like relationship challenges and also like sex positions and games and all sorts of fun extra information. And the proceeds of that go towards funding future sex ed. So all around, pretty freaking awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thanks to everybody who tuned in today. This episode will be available on Podbean and Spotify as well as my website later on as soon as the video finishes rendering. So thank you so much, and we will see you all tomorrow. One last thing is please make sure to share this if you enjoyed it. Share it with your circles. Encourage people to click and join us. Encourage people to call in with their stories and comments and questions. And together we can sort of help demystify sexuality. All right? Take care, everybody, and have a great night.